Adrian had never failed an assessment. He arrived in the town with a spreadsheet, a deadline, and no intention of staying longer than necessary. The coffee shop on the corner was just another asset on the list. Then the woman who owned it handed him a cup without asking what he wanted, and somehow got it exactly right. The town did not wake up all at once. It breathed itself into the morning, slowly, like an old creature that knew there was no reason to rush. Mist lingered low over the narrow streets, curling around lampposts and wooden benches, softening the edges of everything it touched. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, not loud, not urgent, just enough to remind the town that another day had begun. Nora was already awake. She stood behind the counter of her cafe, sleeves rolled just enough to show flour dusted along her wrists. The place smelled like roasted coffee and old paper, a scent that had settled into the wood over decades, impossible to remove and, frankly, impossible to replace. She liked it that way. It meant history. It meant continuity. Too bitter again, she muttered, lifting a spoon from a cup and tasting the brew with a slight frown. She adjusted the grind without hesitation, her movements precise, practiced. There was no guesswork in what she did. She knew the preferences of the people who would walk through that door before they even thought of them themselves. Mr. Harlan, 2 sugars, no foam. Always complains, never changes it. She set aside a cup as if he were already there. Lily, extra cinnamon, even though she says she's cutting back. A small smile tugged at Nora's lips as she reached for the spice jar. This place wasn't just a cafe. It was a map of the town's habits, its moods, its quiet routines. And Nora, whether she admitted it or not, was the one holding it together. She stepped back, looking around. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with books that leaned into one another like tired companions. Some were rare, some forgotten, some borrowed and never returned. But each had a story, not just inside its pages, but in how it ended up here. A narrow staircase led down to the storage basement, though storage was a generous word. It was more of an archive. Old ledgers, documents, newspapers, pieces of a past no one else bothered to keep. Her gaze lingered on a framed photograph hanging near the counter. The cafe, decades ago. Different people, same walls. 100 years, she said quietly. The words felt heavier spoken out loud. A century of existence. And now it balanced on numbers that refused to cooperate. Bills stacked higher than they should. Repairs delayed longer than she liked to admit. The upcoming anniversary celebration wasn't just tradition. It was necessity. If it failed, she didn't let herself finish that thought. The bell above the door chimed. Right on time. Mr. Harlan shuffled in, coat half-buttoned, expression already set in mild dissatisfaction. You've changed the beans again, he said before even reaching the counter. No, Nora replied calmly, sliding the prepared cup toward him. You just noticed them today. He paused, suspicious, then took a sip. A brief silence. It's acceptable, he muttered. Nora hid a smirk. More people followed. A quiet flow, steady, predictable. Conversations overlapped softly, nothing loud, nothing chaotic. This town didn't do chaos. It did familiarity, and Nora thrived in it. She moved between orders effortlessly, remembering names, preferences, small details others would forget. A question about someone's mother. A remark about the weather that turned into a shared joke. It wasn't forced. It never was. But beneath that ease, something else lingered. Every time she glanced toward the register, her eyes sharpened just slightly. Every time someone mentioned the factory on the edge of town, the one that quietly sustained half the local economy, she listened a bit closer than necessary. Because everything was connected. If the factory slowed down, people spent less. If people spent less, the cafe suffered. And if the cafe suffered long enough. She cut the thought off again. The bell rang once more. This time, no one greeted the newcomer. It wasn't intentional. It was instinct. He didn't belong. The man who stepped inside carried the cold air with him, along with something else, distance. His coat was too expensive for this place, tailored in a way that suggested purpose rather than comfort. His posture was straight, controlled, as if even standing casually required calculation. Adrian paused just inside the doorway. His eyes moved across the room, not with curiosity, but with assessment. He noted the shelves, the customers, the narrow layout, the lack of modernization. Small details, all filed away without expression. Then he stepped forward. Nora noticed him immediately. Not because of the coat, not because of the silence that followed him, but because he didn't look at anything the way people here usually did. He wasn't remembering. He wasn't relaxing. He was measuring. Coffee? She asked, keeping her tone neutral. Black, he replied. No hesitation. No small talk. She turned to prepare it, watching him only through reflection in the metal surface of the machine. Passing through? She asked after a moment. Something like that. Vague. Deliberate. Nora handed him the cup. He took it, fingers brushing the ceramic edge with careful precision, as if even that contact required intention. He tasted it. A pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, his expression shifted. Better than expected, he said. That's a low bar, Nora replied. For the first time, something close to interest flickered in his eyes. Not warmth. Not yet. But something had registered. He moved to a table near the window, placing his cup down beside a sleek laptop that looked out of place among the worn wood and stacked books. Outside, the mist had begun to lift. Inside, the rhythm of the cafe continued. But something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that Nora, without fully understanding why, kept glancing in his direction between orders. And Adrian, though his attention remained fixed on the screen in front of him, didn't leave. Not yet. 2 days passed before Adrian returned. Nora had counted the shifts in the morning light, noting the deliberate emptiness of the table by the window with a frustration she refused to name. She didn't say it out loud, didn't even allow the thought to fully settle. But somewhere between preparing Lily's cinnamon-heavy latte and correcting Mr. Harlan's predictable complaint, there was a small, quiet awareness that the empty table by the window felt intentional. It annoyed her more than it should have. Expecting someone? Lily asked, leaning over the counter with a knowing smile. No, Nora replied too quickly, already reaching for a clean cup. Why would I be? Lily didn't answer. She just took her drink and walked away, the faint sound of her laughter blending into the soft murmur of the cafe. The day moved on. Orders, conversations, the steady rhythm Nora knew better than her own heartbeat. By late afternoon, the light outside shifted into a muted gold, stretching long shadows across the wooden floor. And then the bell rang. Nora didn't look up immediately. She didn't need to. You changed the placement of the history section, Adrian said, his voice calm, observational. Now she looked. He stood exactly where he had the day before, coat still immaculate, expression controlled. But this time, his gaze wasn't scanning the room broadly. It was focused, specific. You noticed, Nora said, crossing her arms lightly. Most people don't. Most people aren't looking for inconsistencies. Is that what you do? She asked. Look for things that don't fit. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. No embellishment. No attempt to soften it. Nora tilted her head slightly, studying him in return. Then you're in the wrong place, she said. Nothing here is inconsistent. It just looks that way if you don't understand it. A brief silence settled between them. Not awkward. Not comfortable either. Measured. Adrian stepped closer to the shelf she had reorganized. His fingers hovered over the spines, not quite touching, as if contact might disrupt something. You grouped them by local references, he said. Not by author. Yes. That makes it harder to find specific titles. It makes it easier to find what matters, Nora replied. That was the moment. The shift. Not visible to anyone else in the room, but it happened. Adrian turned toward her fully now, attention sharpened. And what matters? He asked. Nora didn't answer immediately. She reached behind the counter instead, pulling out a worn book with a dark blue cover. No title on the spine. No clear indication of its value. She placed it on the counter between them. This, she said. Adrian glanced down. For the first time since he entered, his composure cracked, just slightly. You keep it out here? He asked. Why wouldn't I? It's rare. I know. It shouldn't be accessible. It's a book, Nora said, her tone steady. That's its purpose. Adrian's eyes flicked back to hers. You're aware of what it's worth? More than you think, she replied. Another pause. But this one carried something new. Not just analysis. Interest. Real, unfiltered interest. It reminded him of a library his grandfather had kept, a place where books weren't assets to be liquidated, but anchors. For years, he had buried that memory under layers of logic and cold data, convinced that sentiment was a defect. But looking at the worn blue cover, the defect felt more like a missing piece of himself. Can I? He asked, nodding toward the book. Nora hesitated for half a second. Then she pushed it closer. Careful, she said. It doesn't like people who treat it like an object. That's not how objects work. That's because it's not one. Adrian opened the book slowly, his movements precise, controlled. But as he turned the first page, something in that control softened. Just a fraction. The noise of the cafe faded around them. Not literally, but in the way attention narrows when something unexpected demands it. You've read it? He asked. Twice. And you understood it? Nora smiled faintly. Enough to know you're about to misinterpret the second chapter. Adrian looked up sharply. You haven't even seen which page I'm on. I don't need to. A challenge. Clear. Direct. And for the first time, Adrian didn't deflect it. He closed the book. Not in dismissal, but in acknowledgement. Sit. Nora said, nodding toward the chair across from the counter. If you're going to argue, at least do it properly. I'm not arguing. You will. A brief pause. Then, unexpectedly, Adrian sat. Not at the window this time. Closer. The laptop stayed in his bag. What makes you think I misinterpret it? He asked. Because you look at things like they're problems to solve, Nora said. This isn't a problem. It's a perspective. That's a convenient way to avoid being wrong. It's an accurate way to understand something that wasn't written to be right. Their voices remained calm. Even. But beneath that calm, something sharper began to form. This wasn't casual conversation. It was a test. Adrian leaned back slightly, studying her the same way he had studied the room the day before. But this time, the analysis carried weight. You assume a lot, he said. So do you. I base mine on data. I base mine on people. And people are unreliable. And data is incomplete. Silence. Not empty. Charged. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nora reached for the book again, flipping it open to a specific page without looking. Read that line, she said. Adrian glanced down. His eyes moved quickly across the text. Then slower. Then he stopped. Something shifted again. Not visible. Not obvious. But real. That's not, he began. I know, Nora said quietly. He looked up. And this time, there was no distance in his gaze. Just focus. You knew I'd stop there, he said. Yes. Why? Because that's where logic stops working, Nora replied. And you don't like that. Another pause. But this one was different. Less defensive. More open. Adrian closed the book again, his fingers resting on the cover a moment longer than necessary. You're unusual, he said. Nora shrugged lightly. You're predictable. A faint breath, almost a laugh, but not quite, escaped him. The first crack in his composure that wasn't controlled. Outside, the light had dimmed further. The cafe was quieter now, the steady flow of customers thinning as evening approached. Neither of them moved. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to end the conversation. And somewhere in that stillness, without either of them naming it, something had begun. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition. And that was enough. The next time Adrian came in, he didn't hesitate at the door. That was new. The bell rang, the same soft chime as always, but this time it didn't interrupt the rhythm of the cafe. It slipped into it. Nora noticed immediately. Not the sound, but the absence of that brief pause he used to take, the silent assessment before stepping forward. Now he just walked in. You're late, Nora said without looking up. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. Adrian stopped at the counter, one eyebrow lifting slightly. We didn't set a time. You came at the same hour 3 days in a row, she replied, sliding a cup toward him before he even asked. That counts. He glanced at the coffee. Black. No sugar. Exactly as before. You're assuming a pattern, he said, taking the cup. I'm recognizing one. A small pause. Then he took a sip. No comment this time. Which, for him, meant approval. The cafe was quieter than usual. Late afternoon, the space between the rushes. A few regulars lingered with books or quiet conversations, but the energy had softened. Outside, autumn had fully settled in, leaves drifting lazily past the window, catching on the edges of the glass before falling out of sight. Adrian moved to the window table again, but this time, he didn't open his laptop. Nora noticed that too. She pretended not to. For a while, nothing happened. And yet, something did. He stayed longer than necessary. She found reasons to move closer to his table, adjusting a chair that didn't need adjusting, wiping a surface that was already clean. Not obvious. Not deliberate enough to be called intentional. But it was. Do you ever leave this place? Adrian asked finally, his voice cutting through the quiet. Nora glanced at him, leaning lightly against the back of a chair. Do you ever stop working? She countered. I'm not working. You're thinking, she said. Same thing for you. A brief silence. Then, unexpectedly, come outside. Nora blinked. That wasn't a question, she said. No, Adrian agreed. She studied him for a moment, measured, considering. Then she reached for her coat. 5 minutes, she said. If something breaks, I'm blaming you. I'll take that risk. Outside, the air carried a clean, sharp chill, the kind that made every breath feel more deliberate. The mist from earlier had long disappeared, replaced by a sky washed in pale gray, the sun already slipping lower. They walked without direction at first. No plan, no destination. That, more than anything, felt unfamiliar for Adrian. You know everyone in there, he said after a moment. Yes. By name. By preference. By habit. Yes. That's inefficient. Nora let out a quiet laugh. There it is. What? The part where you turn something simple into a calculation. I'm not wrong. You're not right either, she said, stepping over a cluster of fallen leaves. It's not about efficiency. It's about connection. And what does that get you? Nora stopped walking. She turned to face him fully now, the wind catching a loose strand of her hair. It gets me a place where people come back, she said. Not because they have to, because they want to. Adrian held her gaze. And that's enough? For me? Yes. A pause. Then she tilted her head slightly. What about you? She asked. What do you get? The question lingered, longer than expected. Adrian looked away first, his attention shifting toward the line of trees just beyond the street. Bare branches, thin and dark against the fading sky. Results, he said finally. Numbers, Nora translated. Yes. And when the numbers are good, they lead to better opportunities. And when they're not, they get corrected. Nora watched him carefully. You didn't answer the question, she said. I did. No, she replied softly. You told me the process, not the result. Another pause. This one heavier. Adrian exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cold air. It's enough, he said, but the words didn't land with certainty. Nora noticed. She didn't push. Instead, she started walking again, slower this time. He followed without being asked. They moved toward the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the trees grew closer together. A narrow path led into the woods, partially covered in fallen leaves that muffled their steps. Careful, Nora said, glancing back at him. It's easy to lose your way here. I don't get lost. Everyone gets lost, she replied. Some people just don't notice. A faint shift in his expression. Not disagreement. Consideration. They walked deeper, the sounds of the town fading behind them. The air grew quieter, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full. Wind through branches, distant rustling, the soft crunch beneath their feet. Nora stopped near a clearing. In the center stood a fallen tree, its trunk worn smooth with time. She sat without hesitation. Adrian remained standing for a moment. Then, after a brief pause, he sat beside her. Not too close, not distant either. Balanced. This is where I come when I need to think, Nora said. You don't strike me as someone who struggles with that. Thinking isn't the problem, she replied. Knowing what matters is. Adrian looked at her. And this helps. Yes. How? Nora leaned back slightly, resting her hands against the cool surface of the wood. It reminds me that not everything needs to be controlled, she said. Some things just are. Adrian followed her gaze upward. Branches stretched above them, uneven, imperfect, unplanned. And you're comfortable with that? He asked. I had to learn to be. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind that settles in, not uncomfortable, but present. Adrian didn't reach for his phone, didn't check the time, didn't calculate. He just sat there. For the first time since arriving in town, he wasn't observing something from a distance. He was in it. And Nora, without saying anything more, let him be. The light continued to fade, the sky shifting toward deeper shades of gray and blue. Eventually, Adrian spoke again. You're not what I expected, he said. Nora smiled faintly. I still on the trees. Neither are you. He didn't argue, didn't correct her. Because for once, he wasn't entirely sure what he was supposed to be anymore. And that uncertainty didn't feel like a problem. Not here. Not with her. Adrian started coming earlier. Not by accident. Not by convenience. By choice. The first time it happened, Nora noticed before he even stepped inside. She was adjusting a stack of books near the counter when her gaze drifted toward the window, and there he was, already crossing the street, earlier than his usual hour, moving with the same controlled pace, but without the hesitation he once carried. The bell rang. This time, someone greeted him. Back again, Mr. Harlan muttered from his usual seat, not looking up from his newspaper. Adrian paused briefly, then gave a short nod. Yes. It wasn't much, but it was more than before. Nora placed a cup on the counter without asking. You're early, she said. You're observant. I have to be, she replied. People depend on it. He picked up the coffee. And now I'm one of those people? Nora met his gaze. Are you? A beat. Adrian didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead of moving to the window, he stayed. That was new. You're not working today? Nora asked. No. You don't sound convinced. I am, he said. Then, after a brief pause, I just haven't decided what that looks like yet. Nora leaned slightly against the counter, studying him. That's progress, she said. From what? From thinking every moment has to be productive. And you're the authority on that. No, she replied calmly. I'm just the one watching you try to unlearn it. A faint shift in his expression. Not resistance. Something closer to acceptance. The cafe filled slowly as the morning stretched on. Conversations overlapped, chairs moved, cups clinked softly against saucers. Adrian remained at the counter longer than usual, occasionally responding when spoken to, occasionally just listening. Observing, but differently now. Less like an outsider. More like someone trying to understand. At one point, Lily approached, her eyes flicking between Nora and Adrian with open curiosity. You're the quiet one, she said directly to him. Adrian glanced at Nora. She labels people quickly, he said. Only when it's accurate. Lily replied without missing a beat. He considered that. Then what does that make you, he asked. Lily smiled. Someone who notices when people stop pretending they don't want to be here. A small pause. Adrian didn't respond immediately, but he didn't dismiss it either. When Lily walked away, Nora watched him carefully. You're adapting, she said. I'm observing, he corrected. Less clinically. Is that a problem? No, Nora replied. It's just unexpected. Another pause. Then Adrian set his cup down. Come with me, he said. Nora blinked. That's twice now, she said. You're developing a habit. You don't seem to mind. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her coat again. Where? You'll see. They didn't go toward the woods this time. They went the opposite direction. Toward the edge of town where the buildings grew larger, more spaced apart, less personal. The roads widened slightly, the sidewalks cleaner but emptier. The warmth of the cafe felt distant here. Nora noticed. You don't come this way often, Adrian said. No, she replied. There's nothing here for me. That depends on what you're looking for. And what are you looking for? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stopped walking. In front of them, beyond a chain-link fence, stood the factory. It wasn't new, but it wasn't forgotten either. Large, solid, functional. A structure built for purpose, not beauty. The faint hum of machinery carried through the air, steady, constant, a sound that blended into the background of the town so completely most people stopped hearing it. Nora crossed her arms. Why are we here? Adrian watched the building. This is what keeps your cafe open, he said. That's not entirely true. No, he agreed. But it's not entirely false either. She didn't like the way he said it. Too precise. Too measured. You brought me here to explain basic economics? She asked. I brought you here because you see this differently than I do. And that matters? Yes. Nora studied him. There was something in his tone, subtle, but present. Not detached. Not fully. What do you see? He asked. She turned toward the factory again, her expression tightening slightly. I see people, she said. Jobs. Stability. Families that don't have to leave. And the structure itself? It's part of the town, she replied. It's been here longer than most of the people working inside it. Adrian nodded slowly. And if it wasn't? The question landed heavier than expected. Nora looked at him sharply. What does that mean? It's a hypothetical. No, she said, her voice quieter now. It's not. A brief silence stretched between them. The hum of the factory filled the space. You think it could close, she said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Another pause. Longer this time. More fragile. Nora stepped closer to the fence, her fingers curling lightly around the cold metal. You don't bring someone here just to observe perspectives, she said. You bring them here because something's changing. Adrian didn't respond. That was the answer. She turned back to him. What aren't you telling me? He held her gaze. And for the first time since they met, there was hesitation. Real hesitation. I don't have all the information yet, he said. That's not what I asked. I know. Silence. The kind that presses in. Nora took a step back. Not dramatic, but enough to shift the space between them. You should have led with that, she said. With what? The part where this isn't just curiosity for you. Adrian's expression remained controlled, but something beneath it tightened. It's not that simple. It never is, Nora replied. Another pause. Then she shook her head slightly, more to herself than to him. I have to get back, she said. Nora. No. She cut in, not harsh, but firm. Not yet. She turned, already starting back toward town. Adrian didn't follow immediately. He stayed where he was, watching the factory, the fence, the place where she had been standing just seconds ago. Then, slowly, he exhaled. Because something had shifted. Not broken. Not completely. But no longer untouched. And for the first time since he arrived, the line between what he was supposed to do and what he wanted was no longer clear. Nora didn't speak to Adrian the next day. That was intentional. The cafe functioned the same way it always did. Orders, names, familiar routines. But something subtle had shifted in her movements. Not visible to customers. Not even obvious to Lily. But present in the way she placed cups down a little harder than necessary or paused half a second longer before answering simple questions. Mr. Harlan noticed, of course. You're quieter today, he said. I'm always quiet, Nora replied. That's not true. She didn't argue. Because it wasn't worth it. The bell rang around midday. She didn't look up. She already knew. Adrian stepped inside. No hesitation. No pause. Same coat. Same controlled posture. But something in him was different too. Not externally. Internally. He stopped at the counter. Nora continued wiping a surface that didn't need cleaning. You're avoiding me, he said. I'm working, she replied. A beat. That's avoidance, he said. She finally looked up. Then you've learned something useful. Silence. Not comfortable. Not hostile. Just suspended. Adrian didn't move toward the window. He stayed at the counter. Closer than usual. I didn't plan for what you saw yesterday, he said. Nora let out a quiet breath. That's the problem, she replied. You're still talking like planning matters more than impact. It usually does. Not to people who live there, she said. That landed. Properly. Adrian's gaze shifted slightly, not away from her, but downward, as if recalibrating. I'm not here to hurt this town, he said. But you might be part of something that does, Nora replied. Another pause. Then she set the cloth down. Say it clearly, she said. What is the factory to you? Adrian hesitated. Just a fraction. But enough. An asset, he said finally. The word hung in the air, cold and metallic. Nora nodded slowly, her gaze hardening. And that's the difference. You see an asset. I see the people who have kept this roof over my head for a century. And to me, she asked. He didn't answer, because he couldn't calculate that answer the same way. She leaned slightly closer, voice steady but sharper now. To me, it's people who come in here every morning, she said. It's Mr. Harlan complaining about his coffee. It's Lily saving tips for her brother's surgery. It's entire routines built on something you just called an asset. Adrian didn't interrupt. He listened. That mattered more than agreement. You don't get to reduce that, Nora added. I didn't reduce it, he said quietly. You did, she replied. Even if you didn't mean to. The air between them grew thick with the weight of the unspoken, a shared awareness that they were no longer just talking about a building. He looked away briefly, toward the shelves. Then back at her. I need more time, he said. For what? To understand the full scope. Nora gave a short, humorless smile. That's what you always say. I'm not wrong to be careful. No, she said. But you're wrong to think careful doesn't already have consequences. A long pause. Outside, the light shifted slightly, clouds moving, softening the brightness. Inside, the cafe felt smaller. Closer. Adrian spoke again, quieter this time. Do you think I came here knowing what I would find? Nora didn't answer immediately. Then, no, she said. But you came here knowing you were looking for something. That was the difference. Adrian didn't deny it. Because she was right. And that truth made everything heavier. Later that evening, after the cafe had emptied, Nora went downstairs. The basement smelled like old paper and dust, familiar, grounding. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with ledgers, archived documents, town records dating back decades. Most people forgot this space existed. Nora didn't. She pulled out a drawer marked with faded ink. Town property records. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. Not yet. But Adrian's words kept repeating in her mind. Asset. Scope. Understanding. Words that didn't belong in her world, but were now standing right in the middle of it. She flipped through pages slowly. Names. Dates. Ownership transfers. Historical notes. Then she stopped. A document. Old. Official. Referencing the factory land. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she read. A clause she had never paid attention to before. Historical designation eligibility. Her fingers tightened on the paper. Because it wasn't just a detail. It was leverage. Or protection, depending on who controlled it. Above her, faintly, the bell of the cafe door chimed again. Too late for customers. She didn't move immediately, because she already knew who it was. And for the first time since this began, Nora wasn't sure whether Adrian was standing on the other side of a counter, or on the other side of something much larger. Nora didn't go upstairs right away. She stayed in the basement longer than necessary, holding the document like it weighed more than paper should. The words didn't change, but their meaning kept shifting every time she read them again. Historical designation eligibility. A clause that had always been there. Quiet. Ignored. Harmless. Until someone had a reason to look for it. Above her, footsteps moved across the cafe floor. Slow. Controlled. Adrian didn't call out. He didn't need to. He already knew she was there. Nora closed the drawer and exhaled once, steadying herself, then climbed the stairs. The cafe was dim now, lights lowered, chairs partially stacked. Adrian stood near the counter, not touching anything, simply waiting. The same composed posture as always, but less distant than before, like he had crossed some invisible boundary and was no longer entirely outside the space. You found it, he said. It wasn't a question. Nora placed the document on the counter between them. Yes, she replied. Silence followed. He didn't reach for it immediately. Neither did she push it closer. That wasn't part of your plan, Nora said. No, Adrian admitted. A pause. But it's part of it now, she added. Yes. That single word changed the temperature in the room. Not dramatically, but enough. Nora studied him carefully. You came here to evaluate the factory, she said. Not to protect it. I came here to evaluate viability, he corrected. And now? Adrian hesitated. Just long enough to matter. Now I'm trying to understand what viability costs, he said. Nora let out a quiet breath. That's a dangerous question for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone who works with outcomes instead of consequences. That landed harder than anything she had said so far. Adrian looked down at the document, then back at her. I didn't tell my father I found this yet, he said. Nora's expression tightened slightly. Your father. The way she said it made the air shift. Adrian didn't react outwardly, but something in him acknowledged the change. Yes, he said. He's the one pushing this acquisition. So you're not the one making the decision. I am part of it. That's not an answer, she replied. A pause. Then Adrian finally stepped closer to the counter. Right now, he said quietly, I don't know what the decision is. That was the first fully honest thing he had said without framing it as logic. Nora noticed, and didn't interrupt it. The silence stretched longer this time. Not empty, heavy with unfinished understanding. Nora finally spoke again. If that designation holds, Nora said, tapping the document, it's not an automatic win. But it's a massive procedural handbrake. They can't touch the structure without a federal environmental and heritage impact study. Which takes years, Adrian noted. Exactly. It's not a wall they can't climb, but it's a swamp they'll drown in trying to cross. It turns a quick flip into a toxic asset. It means every brick of this building and every acre of the adjacent factory grounds are bound by a trust that can't be dissolved by a simple board vote. Another pause. Nora leaned slightly against the counter. So your company doesn't know yet. They might, Adrian said. Or they might assume it's irrelevant. And your father? He doesn't overlook things like that. That statement carried something colder underneath it. Experience. History. Nora straightened slightly. So this is the part where he applies pressure, she said. Adrian didn't deny it. He didn't have to. For the first time, the conversation wasn't just about the town anymore. It was about structure, power, control. and where Adrian fit inside it. Nora watched him carefully. "You knew what this job was when you took it," she said. "I knew the objective," he replied. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. A faint tension tightened again between them, because now the truth was clearer. Adrian wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was a variable inside a system that was already moving. Nora stepped back from the counter slightly. "So what happens next?" she asked. Adrian didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't know the process, but because he didn't trust the answer anymore. "I go back," he said finally. "I report what I found. And then decisions are made above my level." Nora nodded slowly. "That sounds like a convenient place to disappear responsibility." Adrian looked at her. It wasn't defensive, just honest acknowledgement. "It usually is," he said. Another silence. Different this time, because neither of them liked where the logic led. Nora turned slightly away, pacing once along the counter. "You understand what this means, right?" she said. "Yes. If that factory becomes protected, your company can't just shut it down." "Yes. And if they can't shut it down, they'll adapt," Adrian finished. Nora stopped walking. "Or escalate," she added. Adrian didn't respond immediately, because she wasn't wrong, and that was the part neither of them wanted to say aloud. The cafe felt smaller now, not physically, but in weight. In consequence, Adrian finally spoke again, quieter. "I didn't come here to become part of this," he said. Nora looked at him. "You are part of it now," she replied. A pause. Then she added, softer, "Whether you intended it or not." That silence that followed wasn't empty. It was recognition, of distance shrinking, of lines no longer being clean. Outside, the last light of day faded from the windows, leaving only the warm glow of the cafe interior. Inside, two people stood on opposite sides of a counter, but no longer in separate worlds. Adrian didn't leave that night. He stayed long after the last routine sounds of the cafe had faded into silence, long after Nora had turned off the warm overhead lights and left only the minimal glow near the exit. The space no longer felt like a place of service. It felt like a sealed room inside a larger world that kept moving without them. Nora stood behind the counter, still, arms resting lightly on the wood surface, watching him the way she hadn't allowed herself to earlier, fully, directly, without distraction. "You're not going," she said. Adrian didn't deny it. That alone was already an answer. "I should," he said finally, but he didn't move. Nora let out a slow breath through her nose. "That's the second time today you've said what you should do," she replied. "Not what you were doing." A pause. Adrian's gaze shifted briefly toward the window. Outside, the street lamp flickered slightly, casting uneven light across the empty road. "I'm trying to separate emotion from decision," he said. Nora tilted her head slightly. "And failing?" That question wasn't mocking. It was observant. Adrian didn't answer immediately. His hand rested near the edge of the counter, close enough to the document but not touching it, as if proximity alone was already a risk. "Yes," he admitted. The word was quiet, unprotected. Nora didn't respond right away. That mattered more than she let show. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was structured, heavy with everything they were not saying out loud. Finally, Nora moved. She walked around the counter slowly, stopping a few steps away from him. Not too close, not distant. Just enough to make the space between them intentional. "You came here as part of a system," she said. "Yes. And now you're stuck between what the system expects and what you see here." Adrian looked at her. "Yes," he repeated. Nora nodded once, as if confirming something she already understood. "That's the dangerous part," she said. "Not the plan. The doubt." A slight tightening in Adrian's expression. "I don't operate on doubt," he said. "You do now," Nora replied. That landed. Properly. Adrian finally picked up the document again, not opening it, just holding it. Like weight mattered more than content at this point. "My father will not stop this process because of sentiment," he said. Nora crossed her arms. "No one asked him to," she replied. Another pause. "He will escalate pressure," Adrian continued. "Legal, financial, political. Anything that removes uncertainty. And you're telling me this because?" Nora asked. "Because you deserve to understand what comes next." That sentence changed the air slightly. Not softer, more serious. Nora studied him for a moment. "You keep talking like you're outside of it," she said. Adrian looked at her. "I'm not," he replied. "Then stop explaining it like you are." Silence. This one sharper. Adrian placed the document back down again, slower this time. I didn't expect this place to matter, he said. Nora's expression didn't change. Most people don't expect things to matter until they already do, she said. A pause. Then she added, quieter. That's how things get taken away. That sentence stayed in the room longer than either of them did. Adrian stepped slightly back from the counter, as if distance might restore clarity. It's not just about shutting down a factory, he said. Nora didn't respond immediately, because she already knew that. He continued. It's about restructuring the region's logistics network, cost optimization, supply chain consolidation, long-term projections. Each word was precise. Each word was detached, and yet none of them sounded clean anymore. Nora shook her head slightly. That's your language, she said. Not ours. Adrian looked at her. And what is your language? He asked. She didn't hesitate. People who don't get to move when spreadsheets say so. That hit harder than anything technical he had said. A long pause followed. Adrian looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at her. I don't want you to think I'm against you, he said. Nora gave a small, tired exhale. That's not the issue, she replied. Then what is? Nora stepped closer now. Not aggressively, just enough to make her presence harder to ignore. The issue, she said, is that you're part of something that doesn't care what you want. Adrian didn't respond, because he couldn't argue that cleanly. The cafe felt colder now, not physically, but structurally, as if the conversation itself had stripped away comfort. Adrian finally spoke again, quieter. If I go back, he said, I report what I found. The designation, the risk, the legal barrier. Nora listened. If I don't, he continued, someone else will. And they won't interpret it the same way. A pause. So you're not in control either way, Nora said. Adrian didn't deny it. That realization sat between them. Heavy, clear, unavoidable. Outside, the street remained empty. Inside, neither of them moved for a while. Then Adrian finally spoke again. I need to decide how much I can influence before I lose the ability to influence anything at all, he said. Nora watched him carefully. That sounds like control disguised as hesitation, she replied. He didn't answer immediately, because she wasn't wrong. After a moment, Adrian picked up his coat from the chair. Not leaving yet, just holding it. A pause before motion. I'll come back tomorrow, he said again. But this time, it didn't sound like routine. It sounded like a boundary that was no longer stable. Nora didn't confirm. She didn't refuse. She just watched him reach the door. The bell rang softly as he left. And this time, the sound didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had fully chosen yet. Morning came without asking permission. It never did in this town. The cafe opened the same way it always had. Lights flicking on. The smell of coffee rising into the air like a habit the building itself refused to break. Nora moved through it automatically at first. Grind, pour, arrange. Names. Preferences. Patterns. But the patterns no longer felt stable. They felt watched. Adrian arrived earlier than usual. Again. But this time, he didn't step inside immediately. Nora saw him through the window. Standing still. Not scanning. Not analyzing. Just waiting. As if the act of entering required a decision he hadn't fully made yet. The bell above the door remained silent for a few seconds after he reached it. Then it rang. Soft. Final. He walked in. No greeting this time. No observation. Just movement. Nora didn't speak immediately either. She poured coffee first. Placed it on the counter. Black. No question needed. Adrian took it, but didn't drink. That was new. You didn't sleep, Nora said finally. It wasn't a guess. It was a reading. Adrian didn't deny it. I reviewed the file again, he said. Which file? She asked, though she already knew. The designation clause. Nora leaned slightly against the counter. And a pause. Adrian's grip tightened slightly on the cup. It's stronger than I initially assessed, he said. That's your professional way of saying it can stop them, Nora replied. Yes. Silence. Not heavy yet, but building. Adrian finally looked at her directly. I reported it, he said. That changed the air. Not dramatically, but immediately. Nora didn't move for a moment. Then, yesterday, yes. Before or after you left here? After. Another pause. Who did you report it to? She asked. My father. That was the point where the silence stopped being neutral. Nora set down the cloth she was holding. Slowly, deliberately. And what did he say? She asked. Adrian hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough, but he still spoke. He said it was an obstacle, he replied. Not a stop. Nora nodded once, as if she had expected exactly that. Of course he did, she said quietly. Adrian took a breath. He's already adjusting the approach, he added. Adjusting, Nora repeated. Yes. That's not a reassuring word. It's accurate. Nora gave a short, humorless laugh. That's your problem, she said. You keep choosing accuracy over meaning. Adrian didn't respond, because she wasn't wrong. A few customers moved in the background of the cafe, but they felt distant now, like part of another layer of reality that no longer touched the conversation at the counter. Nora stepped slightly closer. You told him about the legal barrier, she said. Yes. And now he knows he can't just push through it. Yes. So now he'll go around it, she said. Adrian didn't deny it. Nora shook her head slightly. You didn't just give him information, she said. You gave him direction. Adrian's expression tightened. I didn't have a choice, he said. That's what everyone says when they already made it, Nora replied. That landed. Harder than before. The hum of the refrigerator in the back of the cafe suddenly felt loud, filling the space where words had failed them. Adrian looked down at the cup again, still untouched. I thought transparency would reduce risk, he said. Nora watched him. And did it? Silence. Then, no. That word carried more weight than all his previous explanations. Nora exhaled slowly. So now what? She asked. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, there was no certainty behind his expression. I don't know, he admitted. That was new. Not the uncertainty itself. The willingness to say it. Nora leaned back slightly. You're not just observing anymore, she said. No, he agreed. You're inside it. Yes. A pause. And you can't step out cleanly, she added. Adrian didn't respond, because that was also true. Outside, the morning light shifted slightly, growing stronger, sharper. Inside, something between them had changed shape. Not broken, not resolved, just irreversible. Adrian finally spoke again, quieter. If this escalates, he said, it won't stay contained to the factory. Nora met his gaze. I know, she said. Another pause. And you still came here today, she added. Adrian didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't a clean answer anymore. He set the cup down. Finally, untouched. I had to see it, he said. Nora studied him. See what? She asked. Adrian looked toward the window, then back at her. What I'm part of, he said. Silence followed. Not empty, not calm, just fully aware now. Nora turned slightly away, but not from him, from the weight of what had entered the room. You should be careful, she said. I am, Adrian replied automatically. Nora shook her head. No, she said softly. You're involved now. That's not the same thing. The bell above the door rang again. Another customer. Another interruption. Reality pushing back in. But neither of them moved immediately, because whatever had started between them was no longer separate from anything else. By the following afternoon, the town's atmosphere had curdled. It wasn't just a shift in rhythm. It was a visible fracture. News of the escalation review had leaked through the council's back channels, and the quiet murmur of the cafe had been replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Adrian sat at the counter, his presence no longer an observation but a focal point of the growing storm. At the counter, not drinking, just waiting. Nora finally broke the silence. You've been here for 3 hours, she said. Yes. You're not leaving. I have nowhere else to be right now. That answer should have sounded simple. It didn't. Nora leaned slightly on the counter. Your father didn't like your report, she said. It wasn't a question. Adrian didn't react. No, he replied. A pause. He requested escalation review, he added. Nora's expression tightened slightly. That sounds official, she said. It is. And what does that mean in reality? Adrian looked at his father, the weight of a decade of expectations pressing against the sudden, sharp clarity of the last few days. He thought of the ledger in the basement and the people standing along the walls, not as variables, but as a cost he was no longer willing to pay. I am making a choice, Adrian said, his voice stripping away the corporate veneer. And if this is an error in your calculations, then your math is no longer accounting for reality. I'm not just reading the data anymore, Father. I'm standing in it. The room reacted before Vincent did. Whispers, movement, uneasy recalibration. Because systems don't like uncertainty inside authority structures. Vincent's voice lowered. You will regret this deviation, he said. Adrian didn't respond, not because he had nothing to say, but because he no longer recognized the frame. Nora looked at him then, not with expectation, but with clarity, and something in her expression told him everything. This is the point where you cannot stand in both worlds anymore. Adrian exhaled slowly, then spoke. I'm not deviating, he said, his voice sharp and clear. I'm finally reporting the full scope. To all stakeholders. A pause. To all stakeholders. That word changed the room again. Vincent went still, because he understood what that meant. Not rebellion. Reclassification of authority. Nora felt it too. The shift wasn't emotional anymore. It was structural. Adrian continued. The designation clause is not a minor constraint, he said. It is legally binding under historical protection statutes. He looked at the council. Any forced transition without proper compliance will result in injunction risk and public legal escalation. Silence. Now different. Now official. Vincent's expression tightened. You are overstepping your authority, he said. Adrian looked at him. No, he replied. I am using it fully. That was the moment everything stopped being controllable. Not because chaos arrived, but because control was redistributed. Nora stepped back slightly, not in retreat, in realization. Vincent's voice softened again, but now it carried pressure instead of certainty. This is a mistake, he said to Adrian. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Then, if protecting people is a mistake, he said, then I will accept that classification. Silence. Absolute now. Vincent looked at his son for a long moment, not as an opponent, but as a recalculated loss. Then he turned slightly away and spoke to the council. We will suspend immediate escalation pending legal review, he said. A shift, not surrender. Recalibration. But enough. The room exhaled collectively. Not relief. Transition. Nora realized her hands were still clenched. She slowly relaxed them. Adrian stepped down from the center slightly. Not toward his father, not toward authority, but toward space. And then he looked at Nora, for the first time without systems in between. Just him. The room began to dissolve into movement again, voices rising, chairs shifting, people processing what had just changed. But between them, there was stillness. Outside, night had fully arrived. The town hall doors opened. Cold air entered. Reality continuing. Nora walked toward him slowly. You did it, she said. Adrian didn't answer immediately, because he wasn't sure what it meant anymore. Then quietly, I didn't stop anything, he said. Nora shook her head slightly. No, she replied, but you changed what it means. Silence. Adrian looked back once toward the hall, then forward. I don't know what comes next, he admitted. Nora nodded. That's the first honest system you've ever been part of, she said. A faint pause. Then she added, come on. He followed. Not as analyst, not as executor, not as son of authority, just as someone who had crossed a threshold that couldn't be reversed cleanly. Behind them, the town continued speaking, but no longer about certainty. And as they stepped into the cold night together, the factory was no longer a decision waiting to be made. It was something that had already changed shape. The cold air outside the town hall didn't just bite. It felt like a physical weight, pressing against the lungs of a town that had spent the last few hours holding its breath. Adrian stood on the top step, his silhouette sharp against the stone, watching his father's black sedan pull away into the mist. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final exchange of barbs. Just the red glow of taillights fading until the silence of the night reclaimed the street. Vincent was gone, but the silence he left behind wasn't peace. It was the vacuum created when a massive structure is suddenly ripped out of the ground. Nora stood a few paces behind him, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. She watched the tension in Adrian's shoulders, the way he stood too straight, as if the moment he relaxed, the gravity of what he had just done would finally crush him. He had just executed a corporate suicide in a public forum, using the very tools his father had taught him, precision, leverage, and timing, to cut the legs out from under the man who had built him. You're shaking, Nora said softly. Adrian didn't look back. Adrenaline is a physiological response to perceived threat. It hasn't recalibrated yet. It's not adrenaline, Adrian. It's the fact that you're human. You can stop citing textbooks now. There's no one left to impress with your detachment. He finally turned. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed out by the exhaustion of a man who had spent 48 hours dismantling his own future. I didn't just stop the acquisition, Nora. I triggered a forensic audit of the entire regional development fund. When I leaked those compliance reports, I signed my own permanent debarment from the industry. I won't just be fired. I'll be radioactive. You did what you had to do, she said, stepping closer. You protected the stakeholders, the real ones. Like you said, I destroyed a $100 million merger to save a town of 4,000 people and a cafe that relies on memory and old ink instead of a cloud-based server, he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time. On paper, it's the most irrational decision I've ever seen. Then maybe it's time you stopped living on paper. They walked back toward the cafe. The town felt different now. The factory on the horizon still hummed, but it no longer sounded like a ticking clock. It sounded like a heartbeat, steady, stubborn, and safe. The historical designation wouldn't just protect the walls, it would protect the lives within them. It was a shield forged from old ink and forgotten laws, held up by a man who had spent his life thinking everything could be bought and sold. When they reached the cafe, Nora didn't head for the door. She stopped at the window, looking at the display. The anniversary sign was still there, slightly tilted. The roof still leaks, she said, her breath fogging the glass. The bills are still due on the 1st. The factory staying open means the town survives, but it doesn't mean the cafe is suddenly profitable. We're still balancing on a razor's edge, Adrian. Adrian looked at the reflection of the street in the glass, then at the woman standing beside him. The data suggests a 30% increase in local foot traffic if we integrate the historical archive into a public reading space. If we modernize the logistics of your supply chain without stripping the character of the service, the margins shift. Nora smiled, a real, tired smile that reached her eyes. Are you trying to consult for me for free? Because I heard you're very expensive. I'm unemployed, he replied, a faint spark of his old dry wit returning. My rate has significantly dropped. She unlocked the door. The chime of the bell felt different tonight, not like a summons, but like a welcome. Inside, the scent of coffee and old paper wrapped around them, a familiar sanctuary that had survived the storm. Nora flicked on the lights, but only the dim ones behind the bar, leaving the rest of the room in a soft, amber glow. Adrian didn't go to his usual table. He didn't reach for the laptop that had been his shield for so long. He walked to the center of the room, running a hand over the spine of a book on the shelf, one of the rare ones Nora had protected. You said this book didn't like people who treated it like an object, he said. It still doesn't, Nora replied, moving behind the counter. But it seems to be tolerating you. She began the ritual, the grind of the beans, the hiss of the steam, the sounds that had defined her life for a decade. She didn't ask him what he wanted. She knew. She made the coffee with a precision that matched his own, but with a warmth that he was only just beginning to understand. She placed the cup on the counter. Black. Strong. Perfect. To the anniversary, she said, raising her own cup. Adrian picked up the ceramic, feeling the heat seep into his palms, grounding him to the floor, to the room, to the moment. He looked at the walls, the books, and the woman who had forced him to see the world not as a problem to be solved, but as a place to be lived in. To the things that don't fit the spreadsheet, he said. They sat in the quiet of the cafe as the first hints of dawn began to bleed into the sky outside. The mist was lifting, revealing the town in sharp, clear lines. There would be more battles, legal fights with his father, financial struggles for the cafe, the slow work of rebuilding a life from the ashes of an old one. But as the light hit the window, Nora saw that the shadow Adrian had carried since his first day was gone. He wasn't just an observer anymore. The yellow document from the basement sat on the counter between them, no longer a hidden archive, but the foundation of the town's new future. He was a man who had finally found a system worth maintaining, one where the variables had names, and the outcomes couldn't be measured in percentiles, but in the steady, warm light of a cafe that refused to go dark. And as the town finally began to wake up, breathing itself into the morning, the cafe door remained closed for just a little while longer. Not because there was no reason to rush, but because for the first time in 100 years, the story was exactly where it was supposed to be.